"Mum, did you bring that book you promised Piper?" The words came out calm, and even, as if I were asking about the weather or what we were having for supper. I am Naomi, 33 years old, standing in the middle of my own living room, while my heart threatened to punch straight through my ribs. Across the open kitchen counter, my husband Dorian was arranging ceramic mugs with the careful deliberateness of a man who believed he had already won. He had his back to us. The coffee maker hissed and dripped. I had maybe 30 seconds before he turned around. My mother Beverly looked up from the armchair. She found my father Harold's eyes immediately. They had been married for 36 years. They did not need words for this. My mother set her mug down with the quietest possible sound. My father placed both hands flat on his knees, the way he always did before standing. He rose slowly, unhurried, the way a man rises when he has made a decision and is completely at peace with it. My mother stood beside him. She did not reach for her coat. She did not explain. She picked up her purse, tucked it under her arm, and my father's hand came to rest gently at the small of her back. "We should head out," my father said to the room. No reason given, no apology offered. Dorian turned from the counter with 2 mugs of coffee. He blinked. "Already? I just brewed." "Safe drive home," I said. My parents walked to the door. Harold pulled it open. Beverly crossed the threshold without looking back at me, because she understood that looking back at me would break the performance we both needed to keep intact. The door swung shut behind them with a soft wooden click. Dorian stared at the closed door for a moment. Then he set the mugs down on the dining table and began to laugh. I am still not sure I have words for the particular sound of that laugh. The way it expanded through the apartment, like something being released from pressure, like a man absolutely certain he had the room to himself. He did not know what my mother and father were doing at that exact moment. He did not know that the emergency code existed. He could not have known, because we created it in a quiet corner of my parents' kitchen in Cochrane 14 months earlier on a November evening when I finally told them what our marriage had become. The first time Dorian grabbed me, we were standing in our kitchen. It was a Tuesday in January, nearly dark by 4 in the afternoon, the way Calgary winters go. The kind of cold that turns exhaled breath into small white clouds inside a car. I had been sorting through a stack of envelopes near the microwave, looking for my car registration renewal, when a folded piece of paper slipped out from between 2 flyers. It was a handwritten statement from a private lender, a company I had never heard of, documenting a loan of $90,000. The borrower's signature at the bottom was Dorian's. I stood there reading it twice, then a third time. Dorian came home at 5:45. He pulled off his coat, tossed his keys into the dish by the door, with the automatic ease of one who believes his home is uncomplicated. I had the paper open on the counter in front of me. He looked at it. He looked at me. He poured himself 2 fingers of rye without offering an explanation. I asked him to tell me what I was looking at. He told me it was nothing, that I didn't understand how high net worth financial management worked, that some investments required bridge financing, and that I should leave things he handled professionally to him. I asked him again. He set the glass down and grabbed my wrist. It was not a prolonged thing, 3 or 4 seconds at most. His fingers wrapped around the bone and squeezed. Not hard enough to leave a mark I could photograph, hard enough to communicate exactly what he intended to communicate. Then he let go, picked up his glass, and walked to the living room to turn on the television. I stood at the counter with my wrist pressed against my stomach. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because the shape of what was happening had just become visible to me for the first time, the way a shape emerges from static when you finally know what you're looking for. I told my parents on a Friday night in November, sitting at their kitchen table in Cochrane, with a cup of tea going cold in front of me. My father Harold is a retired systems administrator for the provincial government. A man who spent 30 years building secure communications infrastructure and trusts nothing he cannot verify. My mother Beverly spent 2 decades as a family counselor. Between them they received what I told them with a stillness I later understood was not shock but preparation. My father did not raise his voice. He asked me a series of quiet, methodical questions. He asked what documentation I had. He asked about our joint accounts, about the apartment, about my grandmother's estate. My grandmother Edna, my mother's mother, had passed away 4 years earlier. She had left me her one-bedroom apartment in the Kensington neighborhood, along with a TFSA she had transferred into my name 2 years before her death. She left it to me specifically, not to us as a couple. My parents had insisted at the time that I keep the property in my name alone and never add Dorian to the title. I had followed that advice without question. I had never commingled it with our joint finances. Under Alberta's Matrimonial Property Act, property inherited during a marriage and kept properly separate is exempt from division. I knew this because my mother had made sure I knew it. Dorian had apparently learned it too, through a consultation with a property lawyer, whose invoice I later found in his desk drawer. My father asked if Dorian knew about the cloud application he had installed on my phone, a secured family folder that allowed any uploaded file to appear instantly in a shared archive, Harold monitored from his own devices. I told him I had never mentioned it to Dorian. My father nodded once and refilled my tea. My mother was the one who suggested the emergency phrase. She said it needed to be something Dorian would hear and dismiss, something domestic, something small enough to vanish in the general noise of a family visit. She thought for a moment and said, "Make it about Piper." Piper was 4 years old and loved picture books, particularly a well-worn Canadian wilderness alphabet my mother had been meaning to bring over for weeks. The phrase would not register as strange because it was grounded in something true. The book really existed. Beverly really had been forgetting it. We agreed that if I ever said it in Dorian's presence, my parents would leave immediately, go to the car, and call the police. My father made a quiet joke about it being a serious pact. My mother said it absolutely was. The $90,000 loan turned out to be the smallest part of the picture. Over the following weeks, I pieced things together the way you piece together something broken. Slowly, and with a growing understanding that the original shape was not what you thought it was. Dorian's firm had placed him on administrative leave in October. He had told me it was a voluntary sabbatical. I found the termination letter inside a manila folder at the back of our filing cabinet, dated the 14th of October, citing a client complaint investigation. He had been gambling. Not occasionally, not recreationally, compulsively for at least 2 years, losing money that was not his to lose. Some of it was client funds he had moved through accounts in ways I am not qualified to describe, but that a forensic accountant later explained to me in a deposition. When the firm discovered the discrepancies, they let him go quietly, which is apparently how those things are sometimes handled to protect the institution's reputation. The private lender, the man whose name appeared on the statement I had found, operated outside any regulated institution. His name was Slade, and that was the only name I ever knew him by. I discovered this because Dorian left his second phone on the bathroom counter one evening. I had perhaps 90 seconds before he noticed. I photographed every visible message from a contact labeled only as S. The language in those messages was not ambiguous about what would happen if the debt went unpaid. Dorian had borrowed against a future he did not have. Slade wanted his money back before the end of February. Dorian had assured him repeatedly that he had a plan. I was the plan. He brought it to me on a Thursday evening, 10 days before my parents' Sunday visit. He waited until Piper was asleep. He called me into his home office, a room I rarely entered, a room he had slowly filled with evidence of a life I was not meant to see, and he closed the door behind me. 2 documents lay on the desk under the lamp. The first was an application to add his name to my grandmother's title. The second was a promissory note, using the Kensington property as collateral for a loan of $90,000. He explained this to me calmly, as though presenting a budget proposal. I told him I would not sign either document. The calm lasted approximately 15 seconds after that. He came around the desk faster than I expected. He grabbed a fistful of my hair at the back of my neck, not hard enough to pull me down but hard enough to make the threat entirely clear, and he leaned close to my ear and told me that if I did not sign those papers within 3 days, he would pick Piper up from daycare on Monday afternoon and drive to his brother's place outside of Kelowna. He used the word instability very precisely when he described how the family court would view me. He said he had already spoken to someone. He said I would spend 6 months in hearings, while he and Piper were comfortable in BC. I did not fight him. I let my body go slack against the edge of the desk, released a sound I engineered to resemble defeat, and pressed my right hand flat against the pocket of my cardigan. My phone was in that pocket. I had practiced this. I had stood in the bathroom 2 weeks earlier and practiced unlocking my phone by touch alone, navigating to the voice memo application, pressing record, eyes closed, hand in my pocket, no visual confirmation. It took me 47 attempts before I could complete the sequence in under 10 seconds without error. I know it was 47 because I kept a note. I felt the faint vibration that confirmed the recording had started. Then I asked him, in a voice I kept small and frightened, to explain exactly what would happen to Piper if I refused to sign by Sunday. He told me in full. He was thorough. He mentioned Slade by name. He described the financial arrangement in terms that would later be of considerable interest to the Calgary Police Service Financial Crimes Unit. When he finished, he stepped back, straightened his shirt collar, and told me I had until Sunday morning. He walked out without looking at me. I stood at the desk until I heard the television come on in the living room. Then I went to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and watched the recording timer pass 4 minutes, then 5, then 6. 8 minutes and 14 seconds in total when I finally stopped it. Sunday arrived the way Sundays in February arrive in Calgary, bright and brutal, the sky a hard blue above rooftops glazed with frost. My parents pulled into visitor parking at 9:30. I watched from the window as they crossed the lot, Beverly in her red winter coat, Harold with his scarf wrapped twice around his collar. They looked completely like themselves. They looked like people arriving for brunch. Dorian had spent the previous hour hiding the documents. I observed him from the hallway, pulling the folders from the desk, sliding them into the bottom drawer, turning the small key in the lock, and slipping it into his trouser pocket. He had texted Slade the night before. "She's coming around. Sunday night." He answered the door with a wide smile. He shook Harold's hand. He took Beverly's coat. He guided them to the sofa with the easy hospitality of a man who had nothing to conceal, then went to make coffee. I came out of Piper's room carrying her on my hip. She waved at her grandparents with both hands, the way she always did, and the sight of it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. I sat in the armchair across from my parents and held her close. My father looked at me the way he had always looked at me when he was assessing something. Not staring, just watching. The focused attention of a man who spent his career identifying anomalies in complex systems. His gaze moved down my arms. I had worn a long-sleeve top, but when I shifted Piper, the sleeve rode up on my right wrist. The marks from Thursday had faded to a dull yellow-green, not dramatic, visible. Harold looked at them for perhaps 2 seconds, then he looked at my face. He did not change his expression, he did not react. He simply held my gaze for a moment and then turned to say something quietly to Beverly. At the kitchen counter, Dorian had his back turned. The coffee machine was loud. He was humming something to himself, the particular hum of a man going through comfortable domestic motions, the hum of someone who believes the storm has passed and the outcome is settled. I watched his back. I drew a breath and kept my voice at the exact pitch of ordinary conversation. "Mum, did you bring that book you promised Piper?" The door closed behind them. Dorian laughed. He poured both coffees down the sink, set the mugs on the drying rack with a clatter, and leaned against the counter with his arms folded. He said to the apartment or to me or to no one specifically that my parents had always been cowards. He said that was the problem with people like them. He said the moment a marriage required any real backbone, they disappeared. He pushed off the counter and walked toward me. He pointed. He told me that my time was officially up, that Slade's associate was coming tomorrow morning to collect the signed documents, and I needed to understand that this was no longer a negotiation. I did not answer. I tightened my arms around Piper, stood and walked past him toward the hallway. I kept my chin down and my steps measured. I crossed the bedroom threshold and locked the door with the brass thumb turn. Piper looked up at me. I handed her the stack of board books from her shelf and sat down on the floor with my back against the locked door. I opened my phone. My father Harold had configured the family cloud application for me, the same secured architecture he had used to manage documents for the provincial government, adapted for a private family folder he monitored continuously. I had installed it quietly, told no one. I found the audio file from Thursday night. I pressed upload. The file was 8 minutes and 14 seconds long. I watched the progress bar. It moved. It climbed through 30%, 60-84. On the other side of the door, I could hear Dorian pacing the living room in a slow, self-satisfied loop. The refrigerator opened. Ice dropped into a glass. He was pouring rye at 10:15 in the morning, which told me precisely where his confidence had settled. The progress bar reached 100%. A green circle appeared. 4 stories below, in the visitor parking lot, my father was sitting in the driver's seat of their Subaru, with the engine off and his phone in his hand. He received the notification the moment the upload completed. He opened the file. He pressed play. I know what he heard. He heard me ask Dorian to explain what would happen to Piper if I didn't sign. He heard Dorian answer that question completely. He heard the name Slade spoken aloud. He heard the part about Kelowna. He heard 8 minutes and 14 seconds of Dorian's own voice, recorded in Dorian's own home office, describing his plan in language that left no interpretive room whatsoever. My father is not a man who hesitates when the facts are before him. He called the Calgary Police Service, identified himself, and described what he had just heard. He provided our address and apartment number. He said his daughter and granddaughter were inside with a man who had made explicit and detailed criminal threats. He was told officers would be dispatched. He sat in the parking lot with the engine off, and he waited. Piper had fallen asleep across my legs by the time the knock came. 3 knocks, hard, evenly spaced. I heard Dorian stop pacing. I heard ice shift in his glass as he set it down. His footsteps crossed the hardwood toward the front door, unhurried, the footsteps of a man expecting a courier, perhaps a neighbor with a concern. I heard the deadbolt turn. The door opened. The silence that followed was brief and absolute. Then I heard an unfamiliar voice state clearly and formally that officers of the Calgary Police Service were conducting a welfare check at this address in response to a report of domestic violence and potential child endangerment. I heard Dorian begin to speak. I recognized immediately the particular cadence of him constructing calm. The measured pace, the slight upward lilt, designed to communicate openness and reasonableness. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said his in-laws had a well-documented tendency to dramatize. He said his family was resting comfortably inside, and this was not a convenient time. Then I heard my father's voice cut through. Harold said my name. He said it clearly, and he said it twice, once as a question and once as permission. I lifted Piper carefully from my lap and settled her against the pillow. I stood up and crossed to the door and turned the thumb latch. The click of the lock was the sharpest, clearest sound I had heard in months. I walked down the hallway. Dorian heard my footsteps. He turned his head. His expression, for just one instant before he recovered it, was the expression of a man watching a wall come down. I stepped around him and looked at the 2 officers standing in the corridor. Harold was positioned several paces behind them, arms crossed, face very still. I told the officers that the report was accurate. I confirmed that the man behind me had threatened to remove our daughter from the province. I described the documents locked in the desk drawer, in the home office. I said there was an audio recording in my father's possession. Harold could provide it directly, in which Dorian had described his intentions in his own words, at length, unprompted. Dorian's composure came apart in stages. He tried to correct me, calmly at first. Then, with rising urgency, he told his officers I was confused, that I was making allegations out of spite following a private marital disagreement. When neither officer moved from the doorway, his eyes shifted down the hallway toward the bedroom where Piper was sleeping. I knew what he was calculating. I had known he would calculate it. I moved to block his path. He shoved me sideways into the wall with one arm. Harold shouted from the doorway. The officers were already in motion. The first officer crossed the hallway in 4 strides and issued a verbal command to stop. Dorian did not stop. He made it 6 paces before the second officer came in from his left and brought him to the ground with a controlled takedown, the kind that produces a very loud noise and ends the situation immediately. Dorian hit the hardwood face first and stopped moving. He was on his stomach with his wrists being restrained when his second phone slid from his shirt pocket and spun across the floor. It came to rest near my feet. The screen lit up. A message from the contact labeled S had arrived at 10:47 that morning. It read, "Cars there at noon, make sure everything's in order." The first officer looked at the phone. She looked at me. She produced an evidence bag from her vest. Neither of us said a word. There was nothing to say. The preliminary hearing was held the following Thursday at the Calgary Court Center on 6th Avenue. Dorian was charged with domestic assault, criminal harassment, uttering threats, and child endangerment. The Crown applied for pre-trial detention, citing flight risk and the recorded statement regarding his stated intention to leave the province with Piper. The presiding judge reviewed the audio file, which my father had preserved with its original metadata and timestamps completely intact, and granted the detention order without extended deliberation. Slade was identified through the messages recovered from the confiscated phone. The Financial Crimes Unit located him within 4 days. The nature of his lending operation, which extended well beyond Dorian's situation and involved a number of other people across 2 provinces, drew the attention of federal investigators. These things move quickly once someone hands investigators a phone containing detailed, dated, specific records. Dorian's creditors came for the apartment within 6 weeks. They arrived through registered mail with the particular confidence of people accustomed to collecting. My family lawyer, a composed woman named Ms. Gerard, who wore the same reading glasses to every meeting and never seemed surprised by anything, reviewed the title documentation, the will, the TFSA transfer records, and the transaction history. She wrote them a letter. The letter cited Alberta's Matrimonial Property Act. It outlined the inheritance exemption and the documented absence of any commingling. It included the relevant case references. It invited them to bring the matter before the court if they wished, with the understanding that Ms. Gerard was prepared for that conversation. They did not pursue it further. The emergency protection order came through family court within 48 hours of the arrest. Sole custody followed through the divorce proceedings. The Kensington apartment, my grandmother Edna's apartment registered in my name, kept separate exactly as my parents had advised, remained precisely as she had left it. Dorian's debts were his alone to carry into whatever came next for him. The law was clear on this. It had been clear the entire time. He simply hadn't believed it until it was too late. It is a Sunday morning in late April now, and the light coming through the kitchen window has changed. It is the kind of light that moves differently. Longer and thinner, crossing the floor at an angle that makes everything look a little newer. Piper is on the living room rug, building something elaborate with her wooden blocks. She is narrating the construction to no one in particular, explaining each structural decision with complete seriousness, which is something she has always done. She hums while she works. I notice these days how much of this apartment sounds like her. My mother Beverly is at the counter beside me, not because I need help with anything, but because that is how Sunday mornings work now. She is slicing an apple into small pieces, the way she always does. The way she has done it since I was Piper's age. My father Harold is at the table with the paper, which he still receives in print, and he has already had his 2 coffees and delivered his forecast on the weather, and asked Piper 3 careful questions about the building she's constructing, all of which she answered with great authority. Beverly sets the apple slices on the plate and glances at me. I glance back. We have talked about everything, across many evenings over many months. We have said the things that needed to be said. There is not much left between us that requires words. I look at Piper on the rug. She reaches for a block, places it carefully at the top of her structure, withdraws her hand slowly and holds her breath. The tower holds. She exhales. This is what safety feels like. I have come to understand. It does not feel like the absence of fear. It feels like watching your daughter hold her breath over a tower of wooden blocks, and exhaling with her when it stands, and knowing that no one in this room is going to take any of it from you. My mother rests her hand on my arm for just a moment, then she goes back to the apple. Outside the street is quiet, the last of February's dark is long gone. We are still here.